So hello everybody and welcome to the Think Global Forum Roundtable. It's another roundtable event where we've brought in some experts on the topic in question. And today we're delighted to be talking all about emerging trends for global events. We've all been through a number of quite turbulent years when it comes to the world of events. And I'm delighted to be joined today by our special guest who's going to be doing a short presentation for us in a moment, Allison Ferch. Allison is the Executive Director at the Globalization and Localization Association. And we'll also be joined by our other panel members. So we have María Roja, we have María Gómez, and we have Carolene, Méli joining us, who all have their own respective expertise when it comes to events, event management, and how the landscape has changed from the world of in-person to hybrid to fully virtual and back again. So it's going to be an interesting discussion. And without further ado, I'm going to hand straight over to Allison, because Allison's going to kick us off with a presentation, maybe to set the landscape and to start some of our thinking when it comes to this important topic. So Allison, I'm going to hand straight over to you.
Okay, thanks, Simon, and thanks for having me. I'll share my screen in just a moment. I just want to say that I'm honored to be with all of you who are probably far more expert than I am, since I think you dedicate almost all of your time to events, whereas that's a big part of what I do, but not all of it. So basically, my goal for us today is to give us a framework for having a conversation. Okay, so I'm going to whip through a few topics and a few trends, and then hopefully give us this framework to talk about this together as a group. So without further ado, what we'll be talking about, just really quickly get on the same page as to what events are and are not in the context of this conversation. Talk about some of the drivers of change that we have seen, especially in the last couple of years, and then take a look at the trends. After that, we're going to have a chat and we'll hear from everybody. And I'm really looking forward to hearing other perspectives. Okay, so for the purposes of our conversation today, I want to say that we're talking about corporate events. So things like concerts and sporting events, yes, those are also events. But today, I think we'll focus exclusively on corporate events, which are, anything that brings people together, has a specific goal, and represents the company or organization in some fashion. So they can be tiny, internal team meetings, or they can be giant. So internal meetings, when we talk about that, are things like board meetings, shareholder meetings, anything for team building, company meetings, which, as you know, can be very big, product launches, awards, banquets, things of that nature. Of course, we're all familiar with learning. Hopefully, we're going to do a little bit of that today here. Biz dev, trade shows, expos, networking events. And then, of course, there are events that are a combination of those things. So that's the context for today. Let's take a look at some of the elements that are shaping our current approach to event planning. So I love Venn diagrams. I'm always thinking in terms of overlap. And obviously, in the last couple of years, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has been the thing that has led to the most change and has radically upended the events industry, but not just the events industry. It's upended everything, hasn't it? So here on this page, I've actually listed a few things that I think are going to be sticky from the pandemic and from that time that we had where events, in-person events, were completely shut down. I would say it's fair to say that the pandemic was sort of an OMG, oh my God, moment for a lot of event planners, but work and society and culture also changed. I think, there's probably going to be courses on this topic. So we're not going to take a deep dive here, but think about, what did we learn? What happened? So a key change would be the migration of people to working from home, and then consequently having globally distributed workforces. I think we all changed a lot of habits and we changed a lot of attitudes. And what I think the takeaway is for many of us is that time has been really recognized as our most precious commodity. We have new approaches to our work-life balance, and we have new attitudes about what we're willing to spend time doing. And of course, that impacts whether or not people are interested in going to events. I think that we've also seen changes in society at the same time. I'm based in the US, and so you might remember that as the pandemic was, unfolding, we were also having a reckoning with racial inequality. So we've seen some changes like the growth of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, a focus on accessibility, a focus on sustainability, data privacy. And then on the technology front, the things that I think, we saw accelerate radically were event tech, remote interpreting, the way AI is used, especially for data analysis. So these are the things that I think are going to be sticky. And I like thinking about, when I think about the pandemic and all the drivers of change, I think, well, okay, what was an accelerator and what was maybe a bubble? So I do think there were some things that pop and disappear, but these are the things that I think are going to be here to stay for a while. So what does that mean, and how does that impact events? So in other words, how do we as organizers respond to some of these sticky factors and drivers of change? What's the new landscape? We could spend a long time, but we won't, too long, on meeting format. So let's all remember, oh, actually, hold on. I wanted to make one more comment about these next couple of slides and what we're talking about. I want to encourage people to think about events, not just singularly as an event, but as kind of the portfolio that your organization or company offers. So at GALA, where I work, we've got a big annual conference. Well, it's not that big, about 500 people. But we also have webinars, we have LinkedIn Live events, we have special interest group meetings, we have what we call local networking events or loc mixers. So think about all of these changes and factors and how they impact your full sort of suite of events, not just a single event. So I wanted to encourage that kind of bird's eye view of events. Also, one more thing, when I talk about hybrid, which we will talk about, I'm sure we'll chat about that too, it can mean a single event, such that like that event has online and in-person components. But I think hybrid can also refer to that portfolio of events where some are in person and some are online exclusively, and some may also be truly hybrid where they have both elements in one single event. Okay, so I just wanted to also give you some kind of context there as I'm talking about it. So meeting format is, let's not call it a trend, but it's something that was changed radically, right? So, I want to look at what's hype and what's reality. Let's zoom in, pun intended, and look at what happened when in-person events came to a standstill in basically March of 2020. We went online, we went 100% virtual, and we learned that some things were great about it, and we learned that some things were simply just awful. So in terms of meeting format, there are absolutely advantages, right, to being virtual. It's less costly. There's no venues, there's no room blocks, there's no food and beverage, there's no travel, there's no AV. Good grief, the cost of AV these days. Virtual events are greener. There's not that same kind of impact. You're not flying people around the world. There's no swag bags. There's no trade show carpet, from the expo that goes straight into the dumpster. They're user-friendly and user-centric based on the technology, in principle, not always true. And they're accessible worldwide. Obviously, time zone still matters, but they're more accessible. Anybody with a screen can access your event when it's online. The other advantage is the use of data. So events remain one of the kind of last sources of first-party data. Think about our registration process. We can ask a lot of questions. And then in event tech, we can get a lot of information from the platforms and make that data leverageable. So, you know, how much time are people spending in sessions? We get instant feedback. We can ask them to take instant surveys. We can track impressions for sponsors. So there's a lot to say that's good about virtual. And I think the last thing to say about that, and we'll talk more about it as a group, it's scalable, right? You can include so many more people in a virtual event than you can in an in-person event. Disadvantages of virtual, keeping participants engaged is so hard, right? Especially in long format, full conferences, for example, day-long events, keeping someone's attention is near impossible. I think it's a poor substitute for face-to-face, and human nature really requires that we have that time together in person. And like I said, we could talk about that for days, but I think we can all agree that there's no substitute for face-to-face. Tech headaches, reliability of connectivity, speeds, things like that are disadvantages. Time zone challenges. Obviously, GALA is an international association and we have people around the globe. And so if we're going to plan something in Central European time, or where I am in Seattle, somebody in Asia is going to be on at 2 a.m. It's tough. Those are hard. So I think it's really clear from the data that virtual events, while they have a lot of advantages, are on the decline. I think that we've seen the peak of virtual events, but it's also clear that they're here to stay in many portfolios. So what we're looking at here is just it's like a keyword search at virtual corporate events. You can see that in the last year, you know, search for that keyword has dropped radically. Here we're taking a look at the concept of hybrid event. So we'll talk about that for just a moment. So like virtual events, I think that the hype or the peak for hybrid, truly hybrid events might be in the past, but there is a role for hybrid. Maybe let's talk about what that is. I think hybrid could mean that you're bringing virtual elements into an in-person event. Event apps are like an obvious example of that. I think we see sometimes speakers or panelists being brought in from around the globe. If they're not able to come in person, you might be able to get kind of a more diverse speaker composition if you allow remote presentations. Hybrid can mean that you're simply going to employ a digital strategy even after live events resume. Like I was saying earlier, it's not just a singular event, it's your whole portfolio. They can be primarily online and then have real life components, or vice versa. The advantages of hybrid are the same as virtual. And the challenges, I think, as someone who's done it a few times, trying to engage both audiences simultaneously, very difficult. Also, trying to get those attendees to feel as if they're attending the same event is really challenging. I would say that there's more prep time is required for hybrid events than just one or the other. And then pricing models. We struggled with pricing models. How do you price these events? We have a long history of how to price our in-person events, but when virtual and hybrid came along, knowing how to price them was a real challenge for people. Another data point to support the health and well-being of virtual and hybrid is the investment that we continue to see in event tech. This is just a screenshot of a site where I was looking basically for investments in event tech, and it's active. The data on the right is a projection for growth in virtual event platforms. You can see that by 2030, it's anticipated to grow hugely. I didn't want to put in a bunch of statistics, but I'm happy to look those up. I mean, I've got them and share them with you if you like. So what I wanted to give as an example here, any enterprise level company that's got, let's say a few thousand employees, they're necessarily going to keep hybrid and keep virtual around. Microsoft's company meeting in 2019 was in person. They charged about $2,400 US to attend, and they had 6,000 attendees. The following year in 2020, the event was free and online, and 197,000 people showed up. 197,000. Okay. Here we're taking a look at, this is data from the 2022 Amex Meetings and Events Survey. And essentially, it might be a little small for you to see, but it shows that across the globe, in-person events are on the comeback trail, and hybrid events are not the darlings that we thought they'd be. However, you can see on the right that there's not a radical decline in the number of virtual and hybrid events planned. And in Asia Pacific, there's a small amount of growth. So thinking about meeting format, it's not going to be about pitting virtual against in-person and then operating them in the exact same way. I think the chance that we have here is to look through different lenses and to know that there's advantages and disadvantages, and understand that we want to match the content and the experience with the customers in the format that they prefer, and that's variable, right? So as always, our goal as event managers is to get people in the right rooms with the right people to help them meet their goals. We want to excite them, we want to emotionally engage them, and the meeting format is going to matter based on who that audience is and what those goals are. Next, let's take a look at environmental, social, and governance issues. This is kind of the next set of trends you saw earlier on my Venn diagram, not related to format or technology here, but really related to more of the cultural and societal changes that we've been seeing. I'll move quickly through this, and I would love if you guys want to hop on the chat, please share additional ideas. I just kind of threw a few ideas in each of these categories, but sustainability is definitely here to stay. As you all are aware, many companies have organizational mandates or organizational priorities for sustainability. And those have to be reflected throughout the organization, including in the events that they run. If you're like me, it's been kind of sickening to see the amount of waste at the end of an in-person event. And happily, people are trying to do something about it. So, what does it mean to host a sustainable meeting? Well, it can mean lots of things. It can mean choosing your location wisely, something that's maybe more central for your audience, so that you consider air travel and the carbon footprint of all of their air travel. It could mean that you're looking for venues that are LEED certified or some other green certification, or that have a track record of best, of good practices in terms of recycling or donating food or, energy conservation. It can mean that you skip swag bags and minimize your waste. You can, in your contracts, you can insist on food donations if possible. You can do carbon offsetting. You can, find an organization that will plant a tree for every delegate that you have. Here, again, with sustainability, we've got hybrid and virtual events for the win. We've got event apps for the win, which can allow you to go paperless. Again, other ideas, throw them in the chat. It would be great to talk about them. DEI and accessibility, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also accessibility have become very important to companies, organizations, nonprofits, really across the board. They are organizational priorities, and they should absolutely be reflected in meetings. Like I said, this is something that I think the pandemic probably accelerated, but it's not a bubble. It's here to stay. Accessibility can cover a wide range of considerations. And as somebody who represents the language industry, I would say language is a big part of accessibility and even more inclusion. So thinking about language, captioning, interpreting, other ways to support communication, and not just at your event, but before and after as well. Physical disability should be accommodated, and that's not just somebody in a wheelchair, but somebody who might need help with stairs or special chairs to get up and down, people who require some quiet space or even a prayer room. Event timing around important cultural events. We have, like I said, delegates from around the world, so we try to be cognizant of Ramadan, for example. With contracts moved, as you all probably have experienced, you didn't necessarily have your choice of dates, but as much as possible, we try to avoid Ramadan because it's very difficult for a person celebrating or marking that to participate in a conference all day. Demographics of speakers and attendees, and even the organizing committee, should be representative of your organization and should be aspirational for how you want your organization to look and be represented. Registration forms that can collect information that is respectful to people's, like we don't need to do that in our organization, but maybe you want to collect gender pronouns, for example. The other thing you can do is look at suppliers and vendors and either hire, for example, minority-owned businesses or other businesses that demonstrate a commitment to DEI initiatives. And once again, if you have some ideas, please throw them in the chat. We'll probably talk more about this as well. And finally, policies, which is the governance element of this. So policies matter. They're not the fun stuff, but they absolutely matter. And here on the screen, we're just talking about some things that might be kind of new or a little bit more important since the pandemic. So privacy is important. Obviously, that's growing. GDPR, the California privacy protection. There are others coming up all the time in the US, and I know Europe has even a more sort of conservative approach to sharing of data. Got to make sure that you're following those. And I think sharing your privacy policy with your delegates and your attendees. Code of conduct, this can cover all manner of things. Health and safety, absolutely. I just wanted to make a comment about that we're no longer in a pandemic, it's endemic. That said, I think looking after your delegates' health and safety at in-person events it's important. Provide masks for people who want them, have hand sanitizer around, have health and safety addressed in your policies, what to do if you're sick, And then same thing with cancellation. I think all of us had to become a little bit more generous with cancellation policies, understanding that it served everybody. If somebody were sick, for example, that they maybe had something, a little more flexibility with cancellation. So yes, COVID protocols. I went to an event last summer where you just would imagine it never even happened. There was no acknowledgement at all, and it was quite uncomfortable. And lo and behold, I did get sick for the first time. So anyway, that's the whirlwind. Again, just throwing out some ideas, a framework for discussion, for format, for ESG factors. And of course, I think it's always fun to talk about all of the kind of social changes that happened that have led to changes in consumer behavior. So we could talk about that too. But that's really it for me. I think I'll just switch off my mic now and turn it back over to Simon and hear from the real experts.
Well,
Thanks.
Allison, thank you so much. I hope everybody who's been watching and listening to Allison's presentation there, I think we touched on so many different areas. I'm going to invite María Gómez and Carolene Méli back on screen, and of course our own Maria Roa here at the Think Global Forum. We touched a lot of bases there, and rather than me jump in with some thoughts, I've got some questions that I'm buzzing to ask, and it's great. I've seen people really interacting with the chat with questions already, but I want to go straight over to María Gómez, and then I'll come over to you, Carolene, just with your initial thoughts, your observations. María, I know in terms of Peldaño, the events management side to your role, and Carolene, we talked earlier about the as the founder of the Leverage Event Lab. I'm really keen to bring you both in. So maybe María, we'll start with you. Just your initial thoughts and maybe some initial pointers in terms of what we're discussing today.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Well, I partially agree with Allison that hybrid events have been very popular during the pandemic, that are no longer that popular. But I disagree with the fact that being sustainable, being greener is not that important at this point, where people are more interested in coming back to the face-to-face, to the in-person, to get together again, and they have misplaced other important things as sustainability, especially if they are not very big companies, that are smaller or medium-sized companies, and that's gonna take time to get back to focus into the important matters as being greener, being more social, having more adaptability to different scenarios or attendees.
Thank you, Maria. And Carolene, your initial thoughts?
Well, this was really interesting presentation for me because I don't come from corporate at all. I actually come from entertainment. I was on tour with Cirque du Soleil for 10 years, mainly running their VIP experiences. And I actually just was part of the relaunch of one of their shows in 2022 in Montreal. So as Allison was talking, I was thinking a lot about the intersection of entertainment and corporate. Myself running the VIP experiences, guests were waiting almost 3 years to come back and watch a show. They were dying to do it. They were counting down the days, as were corporations that use the VIP as an experience for their, whether it was a team, whether it was their clients, whether it was their salespeople, whatever group that they wanted to bring together, they were actually doing it at a Cirque du Soleil show in the VIP. So it's really interesting as I was listening to Allison to think about what potentially the role that entertainment could play in corporate events. You know, I was just part of the development team of a corporate event in Wales, actually. And of course, me coming from that world, the first thing I did is said, okay, I want a live musician on the stage during the lunch break, preferably Welsh, you know, so we can bring in that cultural element. I want a live musician at the entrance while we're doing the badges to create that ambiance. So that's kind of what I was thinking as we were going through that presentation. What role can potentially other sectors that maybe we didn't think about before that were quite distinct, how can they almost kind of mesh together now and create a bit maybe more engaging, anticipated experience for guests that are coming to a conference, let's say. So that's what I was thinking along that presentation.
Well, two great points that you both raised. And I think the Think Global Forum, I remember a couple of years ago when we were sort of right in the height of the pandemic and everything, I think, Allison, you were saying in your presentation, everything went online. You'd no choice in most parts of the world. You just had to go online. And we did a week-long summit, but we limited each day to a maximum of 3 hours because of that fatigue. And that engagement, I think, that you're talking about, Carolene, and Maria, you were talking about that sort of balance between sustainability, if it is a balance, if that's the right choice of words, and that pent-up requirement for people to get back together again in person. And I think people are really thinking about which events they really want to attend. And I think you're both sort of touching on the fact that the events are becoming more than just the event. It's a meeting place again, isn't it? As well as the event. And I think that's important. But just to maybe ask a question, and you can all jump in on this. When it comes to engagement, whether it's virtual or whether it's in person or whether it's hybrid, Carolene made a great point, the rock star on the stage, and I could see Allison's brain turning over with the live entertainment, or whether it's, things that we had to do virtually, which was, things like meditation. We've done on-screen yoga. We've tried lots of different things to keep that online audience entertained. So when it comes to that engagement, has anybody got any thoughts on that? Both in person or virtual, of course.
I can kick that one off. Where I saw some really interesting realizations was I'm definitely not a fan of hybrid at all. I think the amount of effort, intention, budget, planning that goes into an in-person experience, Allison touched on this, you have to take this away from that to then focus on the hybrid element. And for sure, I'm definitely not a fan of it at all. But where I see the tech coming into place is the before and the after. And looking at, can we show, and Cirque du Soleil are very good at this is why I bring it up, can we show behind the scenes, you know? Can we show them setting up the event, for example? Can we show them a little clip with a guest speaker, you know, maybe a precursor to that? So looking at that, how can we intertwine those elements? I think the hybrid style of it can be used a lot better if it's not just let's live stream and hope that everyone has the same experience, but how can we leverage the tech that we now have, because a lot of it is very good, to introduce different elements to the live experience and create a little bit more anticipation for people. That's where I kind of see that side of things.
I think, oh, sorry, Maria, you go.
No, you go.
I think that, Simon, when you're talking about what we can do to entertain people, I mean, we're talking more about virtual events, because obviously in-person events, it's much easier to entertain someone. But when we talk about that, I'm thinking more about, for example, what we did at Vistatec's 25th anniversary. I think it's a great example. We had some really great examples of things that you can do to engage people, and those are games where you can make people participate and be part of the event. It's not just something that they can watch like a concert or something, but it's just something that they can be part of. Like when you make them play like a quiz or something, and they feel like they're participating, and they can cheer the people who are participating too, and they know other people, and they feel like the rush of winning or something. That really worked pretty well. Or like, for example, also we made some people impersonating, some impersonating actors, just like to celebrate and say happy birthday Vistatec or stuff like that. And they made some really cool things for Vistatec. Everyone felt like, oh my God, this is part of Vistatec. And that really made them feel part of the event too. And that worked really well too. I think you need to make things that it will make them feel part of the event, not just some display music or something. It needs to be something that it will make them feel part of the event, and it will make them participate at the event as if they were there in person.
And Maria, you were going to say something, Maria Gómez, you were going to...
Yeah, I wanted to add that some events are easier to make people participate online. But for example, we made a lot of conferences that are purely technical or information. And when you made them in person, you can have the audience there paying attention for half an hour, wherever, just giving a lecture about any topic you may imagine. But when it comes to online, there's not so many ways you can entertain them, because it's actually not entertaining. And it's very, very hard to get the same attention in an online. But as Caroline mentioned, we use technology in other ways we didn't used to. And it's like using that technology, for example, to record everything and have a post-po after the event, so people can actually access to that content afterwards in the timings they want, whenever they want. They can see 10 minutes in the morning and then come back in the afternoon to eat. I think previous pandemic, we didn't use to make so much after work with the conference we made, and that has changed, and we are becoming a little bit more conscious of the event are not only being at a place at a time, but that can have a more longer experience in time.
I think that they're two great points, and I think that longevity to an event, isn't it? Rather than lots of planning, a lot of money spent, the event happens and then it disappears. You know, that longevity, that during and post-event activities are vital, particularly in a world of social media and, you know, video and clipping content and all that good stuff that we all do. The other point I want to raise that came up a lot, Allison, towards the end of your presentation was around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, you know, when I think of inclusion, you know, language is part of inclusion, you know, a topic close to a lot of our hearts. But everything from, you know, people doing sign language on a stage in a physical event, people not being able to understand the language of the speaker. Today, this panel, you know, is multilingual. You know, we speak many languages from this small group of panelists today. And, you know, we're in Spain, we're in the United States, we're in Cyprus, we're in Ireland. And so that multicultural effect is part of that requirement for inclusion. And I'm just wondering on your thoughts on that, because it's, you know, when I think about the sort of, you know, the typical picture you have in your mind of, say, the United Nations or the European Union, or the, you know, they're all meeting, they're all around this huge table in this huge room, but they've all got earpieces in so they can actually half understand what's being said to them. And I think when I think of the world of our physical events or our virtual events today, or even a hybrid event, I don't necessarily see the same level of tools or input. Some people are doing certain things well, but my gut feel is there's a big gap here still when it comes to inclusion for events. And I'm, you know, I just like your view on that, or you know, whether you agree or disagree. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
I think that in our industry, and when I say our industry, I mean Vistatec and GALA, and we're lucky in that, like, we're global by nature. So we don't have to try very hard for global representation, for example. It's just built in. I have not ever been on the other side of it where this is a mandate and I'm trying, you know, to build it. But I could talk about language. It's a really interesting challenge. And in our world, again, my experience is probably not representative because everybody in our sector is multilingual and English is their lingua franca. So even when we've polled our members about, for example, our webinars, would you like to have webinars captioned? Would you like them offered in another language? The answer is usually no. Like 25% of people say, sure, it would be cool to have it captioned in English. But I do think that other organizations and companies, I mean, I think about Cirque du Soleil, like also super global, but in a different way. You know, there are so many great platforms now, conference interpreting, remote interpreting platforms that are now being built for this, and I think are going to become more and more available. Those are great, especially for online meetings, but we've seen some demoed where it can happen in a live meeting as well, and you can do it with your cell phone. So if you've got your headphones and your cell phone and their app, you can actually listen in different languages. So I think we're going to see that grow, and I think that language as a component of accessibility is going to be more mainstream in the coming years.
It's an interesting point. And Carolene, can I ask you just a question on that? Because Cirque du Soleil, once you mention that, it comes up a lot because everybody's familiar with that global brand. And I know you spend a lot of time working with the Cirque du Soleil brand, but it's a very visual medium, obviously. So when it comes to things like language and inclusion, the world of visual and maybe to some degree entertainment and music, you know, I'm thinking about, to Allison's point, you know, English speaking music does well in, you know, countries where English isn't the natural language. So what are your thoughts from an entertainment perspective when it comes to inclusion and language?
What's really interesting about Cirque du Soleil is it is very rare that if there's any words in a show, whether it's in the music or the clowning or the characters, it's rarely in any language. It's a made-up language. And that's done very purposefully, right? It's so whoever you have in the audience can form their own interpretation of what's going on. A lot of times, and I saw this with my own eyes, a lot of the clowns would spend time before or at the beginning of a city, actually learning some colloquial, like slang, little words they could use, phrases. And oh my gosh, the crowd, like the audience would go absolutely nuts over that. And when I think, and then on the other side, when we look at our staff, and this I think becomes very relevant, is every city that we went to, you know, I did this in 17 countries, the staff were local and they had to speak the language of the guest, and then they had to speak English to some degree to communicate with us, although a lot of us were multilingual as well. And that was very, very important because we are there for the guests, right? Imagine if you're taking your staff with you and they can't really communicate. So when I think about that in terms of maybe a corporate event, I think about how can we understand a little bit more of our guest portfolio before they arrive, and how can we maybe change our staffing mentality a little bit, right? And bring in different people if we see that. And I'm talking really in person here, but if we see that, you know, 10% of the audience are from one particular language, can we maybe have some staff hired for that day that also speak that same language? So maybe the whole entire event is English, but now you're creating a lot of micro experiences that are actually going to form these really meaningful connections for a guest if they're coming and in English potentially is their second language, which of course is the case all the time. So that's kind of where I see the connection there, is what can you do at your event by utilizing or just changing that mentality of staffing is the perfect example. How can we change that a little bit to create some smaller experience, and not experiences that you're planning that just happen naturally because we all want to connect with each other in more meaningful ways, right? So yeah, there's a lot of lessons that can be taken from a Cirque du Soleil show for sure, and that's one of them.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I want to go back to María Gómez's point as well about this. I'm paraphrasing a little, but this sort of pent-up demand that people wanted to go back to in person, that, you know, people are relishing the fact that we can actually be together again. And we've seen that in some industry sectors too. We saw it in the travel industry, didn't we? We saw the travel industry pretty much grind to a halt. And then all of a sudden, everybody wanted to go on holiday again or wanted to go somewhere else because they've been locked down to some degree. When it comes to that scenario, I'm interested in it from a future perspective, and that's the question I want to put to the panel next. For people like me and maybe you who have been in person a lot, maybe having to go to online only, have tried some of the hybrid and, you know, maybe think it's okay or not really a big fan, wherever you are on that scale. And now, like with the big GALA event, for example, coming up in March, back to this in-person extravaganza, or Cirque du Soleil, back to packed audiences. But what about the next generation coming through? That's my forward-looking question I've got for the panel. What about people who haven't been through that? What about the younger age profile joining the workforce today? What are they going to be expecting when it comes to the future of events? Who would like to jump in on that?
I think it will come to making the in-person more technologically challenging and offering even a greater experience than before. They will be expecting more than the generation that is currently undergoing, because they will see it as something unique. Like Allison mentioned, time is going to be super valuable, and you have to prove the value more than anyone that the event they are going to attend is what they have to. There's no other option for them than to attend, to keep their interest.
I'll add to that. I think that we'll see there's a spike. Obviously, it's like the rebound effect. The moment people could travel, there was tons of travel. I think it'll normalize again. But what, you know, this is what I enjoy thinking about is like what's sticky, what's going to stay the same. And we need to understand what they want and then what they're willing to give for it. So yeah, there's going to be people, and I've spoken to them, that say, I'm not ever going to another live event again. Okay, fair enough. And then there's others that will go to every single one, but there's so many in the middle that are like, well, what's in it for me? How much does it cost? How much of my time am I giving up? How far do I have to travel? You know, I think they'll be much more discerning about how they spend their time and their money. And it's incumbent on us as organizers to entice them to spend their time and their money with us at our events. I think that young people, to me, I'm a believer that it's human nature to want to connect face-to-face, in person. Granted, there is a segment of the population that doesn't like that. Acceptable, fine, absolutely. There's so many that do. And like when we had our conference in San Diego, it was like the very first conference, right? That once things had opened up again. And I joked with people that we could have like shown reruns of The Office and served popcorn in paper bags, and everybody would have been so happy. You know, like the bar was low to please them in the beginning. That's not going to be the case. I think the bar is going to get higher and higher to please people and to entice them to spend their money and their time on our events.
Yeah, that's great.
I think,
go ahead, Maria.
It will all depend on what it's the objective of the new generations, because I think we're not talking about that, but I think both events, I mean, because I don't know yet about hybrid, I think we still need to work a lot on hybrid events and see what it's going to come from them, but virtual and in-person events are here to stay. And I think virtual are more for learning. Learning events in the virtual world are amazing. I mean, I can right now take a course on Yale University without having to be there, you know, and I can take so many opportunities that I couldn't before. So I think if you're thinking, for example, for a learning opportunity, right now, virtual events is a go. You can even record a class and take it later. I mean, I can be working and studying at the same time, which was something that I couldn't do before. So I think for learning, the virtual events are amazing, and it's an opportunity that we didn't have before. So if you're looking for that goal, then learning and virtual, it's a go. But if you're looking for networking, I still think, even though virtual has gone really far and there are many platforms that are offering you new forms of networking, in person, it's the way to go. I mean, still virtual is not offering you the same options. So even for the new generation, I think, I mean, maybe the new, I don't know, the new world is going to give us something new, but I think the in-person events will be there to stay for a long time. I think we need to see each other in order to network and to talk to each other and to make businesses. I think that's the way to go for now and for a few more years.
Well, thank you to Maria, and thanks for all the conversation so far. Allison, you've certainly sparked a debate here. I want to go to a Q&A because I want to continue the discussion, and I don't want to run out of time because we do have some great questions and comments which will help us continue it. And the first one's from John, and I would just want to maybe put to the panel. John's saying that planning an in-person event that will be live streamed, but you're not sure it will be interactive for people watching virtually. Okay. John says, look, you might address this with in-person meetings coming back, but do you see the in-person meetings actually being smaller? Do you see people more comfortable in attending events that maybe have outdoor aspects with less people? Any views on that?
There's data on that. There's been studies about, so many studies, right, about who's coming back. And actually people are seeing more attendance. A lot across the board. I do think that having outdoor elements, John, is good. We saw that in San Diego. Like, we did as much as we could outside, and it was lucky that we could because the space was configured that way and the weather was suitable. And I think it made people comfortable. We had our meals, we had our lunch outside, we did networking outside, refreshment breaks outside. And I think that was more comfortable from a safety and wellness point of view. I don't know if I agree that events are going to become smaller. And the data that I've looked at doesn't suggest that.
I agree with you. I don't think they will. And I think I have to say, for the last events that I attended in different parts of the world, I think people are kind of I'm not going to say forgetting COVID, but they are kind of learning to live with it. And they don't need like open spaces anymore, or they're not requesting it as much as they did. There's some people who still go to events and they wear masks if they feel like they need to, but they're not like requesting an open space to be at. So I don't know if that would be a requirement for someone to attend an event at this point. I think we're learning to live with it, maybe.
Yeah, thanks, Maria, and thanks for the question, John. Yuka has a question for us, and it's back on the sustainability thread that we've been discussing. And she's mentioning the badges. I think you may or may not have seen them, but you know, the conference badges that everybody's used to wearing around their neck on a lanyard, and a lot of them are plastic. And I'm sure Yuka, as we all have had a wall of them at some stage. But from a sustainability and a recycling perspective, they're not great. And Yuka's mentioning the ones that she's seen where she references a conference she went to where the badges were made from this plantable material that had seeds embedded in it. So once you've finished with your badge, you put it in the soil or a bit of compost, and it actually grows into a plant, which I think is very, very cool. But the question I think I'd tag on the end of that, when it comes to things like food waste at events, I know we had another comment, another question around food waste, and people maybe don't consider that. But as event organizers, when you look around at the event and at the end of an event, you suddenly know what you've spent money on, what's been consumed and what's left. And there's normally wastage, whether it's the stands that people haven't taken back with them that need to be disposed of effectively, whether it's the food waste, whether it's the plastic badges and the signage. Any thoughts on how we get better at sustainability from, I suppose, an in-person event perspective?
I may have a comment on that, because I don't know if it's all about Europe, but here in Spain, for example, from the 1st January, there is a new tax on plastics, for example, that has more or less forced the market to reinvent itself again. So if you want to make ends meet with the budgets and with the sustainability program of the companies, you have to be very creative on what you do or what you don't. So we actually have, there is plenty of companies right now that work with 100% recyclable plastics. So there is no waste generated. There are also plenty of catering companies that work with ONGs or with organizations that provide the food that are left from different events to be given to the ones in need. There is plenty of companies now that reuse all the booth you have to build up a booth, a stand in a show. They reuse every single material. The carpets, you have many companies that right now recycle 100% of the carpets. They are no longer disposable as they were. So I think it's just a matter of looking up. If you're really worried about that, just look up, because there are plenty of chances of opportunities to be sustainable right now.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Allison just made a great comment there in the chat. If anybody wants to check it out, it's an important point. Just make sure you work with your venue to make sure you understand what their recycling policy is. And if they don't have one, you can always hire a third party. Obviously, it costs some money, but it's good to make sure you have that in place. So that's a great point. Thank you, Maria, for that comment. I want to touch back on sustainability in a moment, but I've got a question from Cecilia, and Cecilia asked about, I think it's back to your point, Carolene, when you were talking about understanding from a Cirque du Soleil a little bit about the audience that's going to be coming to an event. Maybe that's at the point where Cecilia asked this question, but the question is, what are you doing to know what the client wants to make them choose your event over other events? Because obviously the event space is quite crowded. We're all competing for audiences. So what are you actually doing so you know and understand what the client wants to help them to choose your conference or to come to your event? Anybody, any thoughts on that question?
Sure, I'll say something. I mean, we spent a lot of time trying to understand who our audience is and what they want. And, you know, this is more the marketing side, where we have personas and we have a customer journey that's, you know, some of these very traditional marketing tools. We always do a post-event survey and really ask for honesty. We don't mind hearing bad news. And then I think the other element is in the organizing committee, which in our case is really focused on the programming, the content, the sessions. We try to make sure that that committee is representative of our membership and of the people that are likely to come to our event, so that they're representing those interests when the program is being formed. And then in theory, it will be attractive to a diverse range of people. So I would say making sure that like marketing and events are best friends and talking about those things. Obviously, Ceci, you know, like in our case, we're 5 people, so we all do all of it. And some of that that's like institutional knowledge to know who our members are and what they want. But I think the other thing that I read about is like the data that event tech can provide can be useful. And that's where virtual events have a leg up, which is like you can find out which sessions people attended or where they weren't paying attention. We've all seen the Zoom reports where, you know, so-and-so was not paying attention 85% of the time. Like, okay, well, that wasn't a very good choice of session then. So we can look at the data that we have from event tech. We do head counts at in-person events because we don't use like QR codes for digital check-in typically. But the data can also be sort of plumbed or what's the word, you know, yeah, I guess whatever. You can look at the data to try to get some insights about what succeeds, what fails. That's a bit of a retrospective, learn from your mistakes kind of a thing, but that can work too.
Well, look, that's great. And as we come to the end of our sort of time here, I want to put one more question to the panel. And thank you to everybody who's given us questions and comments. The chat's been very active today. And if we haven't answered your question, we will get back to you after this discussion taking place live today. But the question I've got for each of the panel here is, just to put you on the spot for a moment. I'm looking at things like technology, and you may have seen this doing the rounds in January of 2023. There's new technologies that have been with us for a little while, but they seem to be getting better, where people are standing in they're standing in physical horizontal boxes, and they're being beamed into another venue somewhere around the world. And it's a pretty good, it's almost as though, I mean, they're behind a piece of glass, but it's a pretty good hologram effect. And I'm just wondering whether you think that the future of non-human presenters, or being able to beam yourself around to multiple places, which cuts down on the jet fuel and the hotel costs and the fatigue on the human body, whether you think technology is going to play a major role. And my final question that I want to tag on to the end of the technology question is, when it comes to your own event selection for the coming year ahead, are you thinking a lot more carefully about what you attend to in person versus virtually, or are you just can't wait to get back to doing things in person? I'd just be interested in your own personal view. So maybe we go round the panel, and maybe Maria Roa, can we start with you in terms of your own views on the technology play for the future of the events industry, and also what are you looking forward to the most about events?
Well, as I said, I think the hybrid is the one that needs to change more. And I think technology is going to play the biggest there. I think technology needs to change for that. I think probably also if we want to change the networking and make it bigger in the virtual world, then technology needs to be bigger. That I think right now we have some really cool platforms like Remo that it's already on the way, and it's pretty good for that type of networking events online. But I think we still need like a little bigger step. So technology probably will be there. Right. And as Maria said, for the new generation, even the in-person events would need to be more in the tech side, because that's what the new generation is asking for. So probably tech is going to be huge for events. We need to update ourselves. Thank you, Maria. From one Maria to another Maria, what about your own view on, are you dying to get back into the in-person again this year? What do you think about the future of technology and events?
Well, we have actually come back into the in-person 90%. We were making 100% online on 2020 and 2021. But as soon as they opened it in summer 2021, we went back to in-person because it was what our attendees were asking for. They didn't want more online. They didn't want it to be hybrid. They wanted to be back in person. And for 2023, it's in person like 99%. As I said, technology is going to be a must. I mean, we have to improve so many aspects of the in-person events. Like we mentioned before, the badges. Well, there are already solutions to make access possible with your mobile, not even opening anything, just with the NFR connection, that it sends that you're here, that you have come to the event. You don't have to go with a QR anywhere. And that's six, but we are not using it as much as we will be. As Maria said, new generations are 100% technology centered. I mean, I cannot imagine someone now in their 80s, 90s or 20s not using a mobile for anything. And we have to go to that. And as I said, we have to be more special, more experiential than anywhere, because people need to focus. They won't go to everything. They will select a lot more what they are gonna do.
Thank you, Maria. Some excellent points. Yeah, I think people are a lot more selective. Yeah, and interesting points on the generation coming through. Caroline, what are your views on the same question?
Yeah, something I'm really excited about right now is unexpected collaborations. And it's not, where I see it is, the perfect retail is very good at it right now. For example, a recent collaboration between Gucci and North Face, two brands on the complete opposite ends of a retail consumer perspective. Just recently, actually it's happening very soon in London, a collaboration between Gymbox and The Breakfast Club, two well-known brands in London coming together to create an event around a brunch wellness theme. And so I'm very excited in that space. Another example, this is not event related at all, but think of when Paul McCartney and Rihanna came together to create a song and the world just flipped out for different reasons, because you would never put those two in the same room as each other. And so when I'm thinking about how we're enticing people to come back, especially younger generations, what unexpected collaborations can you potentially create at your event, so that somebody comes to your event and they know your brand, your company, they know their own company, but all of a sudden they see something that they're like, what? Like, how are they here? And now they have this incredibly memorable experience. So that's what's going to get me personally to an event. And a lot of that will come into pre-engagement before event teasing. That's what TikTok's for. That's what social media is for, is how can you drop those little nuggets, drop those little clues about something that potentially might come up at your event. That's a very easy way to get somebody to choose your event over another. But I think very unique, unexpected, interesting collaborations is something that is trending in retail, and I think that will cross over to events. I mean, it already has, but I'm very excited about that particular space.
Love that. Yeah, great point. Thank you very much indeed for sharing that. And last but by no means least, Allison, you have the final word.
Caroline, your job is like very cool, and you make me feel a little bit old, but I love that. I love that. And I want to just say, like, for me, sensible novelty would be attractive. I don't want like so avant-garde that you're like, you know, what? No, it's got to be sensible and attractive in some way. So I love that. That's cool. Yes, of course, tech's going to continue its onward march, but I do think that with this change in the culture and people's sort of like, you know, Zoom fatigue and everything else, they're going to be pretty discerning. And privacy matters. Like I'm thinking about what Maria said about, you know, the switching on your mobile and letting them know that you're in this session or that session. I know lots of people that wouldn't do that. They wouldn't allow it. So I don't know, you know, gimmicks won't last. I think anything that's kind of really sensible will last. But in terms of what I'm wanting to attend, I'm a bit old-fashioned. I really don't like the virtual events very well, but sometimes I do it because I should, and I should be there and I should participate, but it's usually a should, which of course in my, you know, advanced stage, I try to get rid of those as much as possible. But I love the in-person events, yet I'm still going to be very discerning about, is this going to help me meet my goals? So being clear about my goals, being clear about why I'm going, and really weighing the cost, like, what do I want and what am I willing to give for it? That's going to be the calculus. But last thing, absolutely, GALA is going to continue to do mostly virtual events, right? Because we have this global audience, and because so much of what we do is focused on learning, like Maria Roa said, we do mostly virtual events. And then we've got, you know, the annual conference, which is going to be in Simon's backyard in March. And then local networking events where you're just really getting people in a city together to meet up. So
thank you, Allison.
Long live virtual, but long live in person.
Look, I think, as Maria Roa said earlier, I think it's a world we're living in, this world where it's a bit of each, and we're looking forward to a big GALA extravaganza in March in Dublin, Ireland. And listen, wherever you're hosting events, wherever you're traveling to, whether it be through the magic of the internet or whether you're traveling to them in person, we wish you the best. I hope everybody's enjoyed today's Think Global Forum Roundtable. I've certainly enjoyed the discussion, and I just want to thank Carolene, Méli. I want to thank Allison Ferch, of course, and Maria Gómez, and our very own Maria Roa. And thanks to everybody for the questions and the comments. We hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate your time. Hopefully we'll see you again soon.